Hi again, and welcome back to Platonic Soul. I hope you've been well. I'm talking today about the difficulty we people of the modern age in the West often face when we try to get our heads around Plato's teaching on love and desire. There's something about it, I think, we feel reluctant to accept, even though this teaching would help us to lead happier and more truthful, more authentic lives. There's a resistance to it that perhaps operates on a not entirely conscious level, I think, a kind of mental block. This block is a preconception we bring to Plato, or perhaps more accurately, to ecstasy itself. I think the preconception has been taking shape in the West for centuries. In the next couple of episodes, I'd like to start talking a bit more about it and about the key to liberating ourselves from it. First, today, I want to talk about some of the things we've missed in Plato's teaching on ecstatic or unitive states. We kicked off this discussion in our last episode. We looked at some of the things Bertrand Russell and Rebecca Goldstein had written about Plato. You might remember that what these two philosophers, writing about 70 years apart, had in common was that they saw Plato as essentially unsuccessful in synthesizing or reconciling the rational and the irrational, or perhaps apparently irrational would be a better way of putting it, in human nature. Another way of expressing this really is that they saw Plato as in some key areas lending too much credence to highly individual, in their view, highly subjective states of consciousness, states that involve some degree of ecstasy, mysticism in the words of Russell, and all those apparently unreasonable or actually kinky mental states or points of view, as Goldstein puts it. The mental states that are unitive to some degree. And we've seen these come up in Plato's dialogue with Phaedrus in many ways. So these are just two philosophers, but I think we can take them as, in a way, both representative of and also to some extent shaping a more widespread tendency. Both had or have an influence that extends unusually far outside the academy, for one thing. You could call them both sort of public intellectuals. Russell, of course, was one of the architects of analytic, or if you like, Anglo-American philosophy. He also authored an almost staggering stream of books, many of them intended for a fairly wide audience, and was awarded the Nobel Prize for Literature in 1950. And he was also often in the limelight, championing political causes like pacifism, for which he actually did jail time during the First World War. Like Russell, who had studied at Cambridge, Goldstein studied at some of the most prestigious universities of her time, doing her PhD at Princeton. They both came from what you could call the academic mainstream of the Anglo-American world. Goldstein earned all sorts of accolades, partly for her extensive work in philosophical fiction. And her 2014 book, Plato at the Googleplex, was both intended for and received by an unusually large audience for a philosophical work. It made quite a splash, actually, getting reviews mostly pretty positive in all sorts of mainstream media, the New York Times, the Guardian, the Atlantic, the Washington Post, the Wall Street Journal, many others. The fact that it resonated so well with reviewers suggests to me that they brought similar convictions to philosophy that she does. If not, it seems they came away convinced by her anyway. So, to a great extent, the Plato that Russell and Goldstein present to the world is the Plato that the world sees, at least, or especially, the English-speaking world. Their conclusion that Plato was never able to reconcile the rational and the irrational, or the apparently irrational, in human nature is probably not that atypical, I think, for people in that world who think about Plato, both inside and outside the academy. This is why I think it's quite significant that, in my view, they miss something very important about Plato. They miss, in fact, what to my mind is Plato's great gift to the world, the great hope that Plato holds out for us. And that is, as I said last time, that Plato's teaching on love or desire is the best solution we have for resolving the great human dilemma, the great problem we humans face as humans. I mean, we have faced a lot of other problems like death that all animals have. But the great problem that we humans have as humans is inner dividedness, the universal struggle we experience between these two great aspects of the psyche or moments of mental life that I've been talking about, the rational and the irrational, if you like, reason and passion, or reason and intuition, the head versus the gut. A struggle that is, as we saw in the early episodes of this series, the fundamental cause of human despair. The fault Russell found with Plato is at the very heart of the Platonic system. To Russell, it seems that Plato's assertion that the good is the principle of reality must rest solely on some sort of mystical vision. He seems unaware, Russell does, that there's a rationale for this assertion. As we saw a few episodes ago, it can actually be partly inferred from what's in the dialogues and is also argued more explicitly by Plotinus as well as other philosophers in the so-called Neo-Platonic tradition. In short, it's hard to imagine what the principle could be other than the unity of everything, the one. But the more we looked at the good, the more it started to look like the one. So it seems that reason can, in some sense, show that the good is the principle of everything, independently of some sort of immediate cognition. This isn't to say that Socrates, Plato, and the Neoplatonists didn't also have some sort of immediate knowledge of the one, the good. In fact, as we saw, this cognition of the good or the one must be immediate in some way, not through the medium of abstract thought, because if the good is truly absolute oneness, then it and the cognition of it must be beyond the subject-object divide that we have necessarily in abstraction. But Russell's criticism that in Plato, mysticism ultimately has the upper hand over reason is unfounded to me. Reason has been necessary in the Platonic system to point the mind toward the one as the good. And so it seems reason and immediacy actually complement one another in Plato's teaching on the good. They're in harmony. Goldstein's critique of Plato focuses more generally on the credence or significance he seems to give to these moments of immediate or unitive kinds of cognition, intuition, inspiration, and the like, these various forms of mania that Socrates in the Phaedrus says come from the gods. Goldstein sees the convictions that come out of them as essentially subjective and therefore untrustworthy, not valid philosophically. As we saw last time, she recognizes that Plato is also often quite critical of a reliance on this kind of cognition. Debated on this, couldn't figure out a solution. He was never resolved the objectivity of these perspectives with philosophy's need for objectivity. I think what is missing here is that Plato, while conceding that the convictions that issue from these mental states are not reliable simply because they issue from these states. At the same time, is trying to tell us that these states offer us deep hope beyond what reason can attain alone. Potential for the profound and most also dangerous self-deception, but they also offer the possibility of, as I mentioned earlier, a happier, more authentic life. For Plato, this kind of cognition is prone to error. It may or may not be sent by the gods. At the same time, it actually offers us a glimpse of the very reality and the ultimate object of our prayer. If the good is one, this absolute oneness in which the difference between subject and object appears, if that's what the good is, then these unitive experiences, moments in some way, or to some extent, transcend this divide, must be some kind of glimpsing of absolute unity, some kind of, we must come out of them with some kind of awareness of what oneness is. Therefore, of what absolute good is. The psyche is transformed by this awareness it has of the word good, manic experiences. In fact, this can happen without us being aware, and maybe this is even how it mostly works. The psyche has the potential to emerge from these states better and more unified. Plato actually talks about this in Book 3 of the Republic, in his discussion of the necessity of teaching music and the other arts to the guardians of his ideal community. In speech, music, gracefulness, and fine rhythm, that's beauty, basically, are all adapted to a simplicity of character. And I do not mean simplicity in the sense we use it as a euphemism for foolishness, but where the mind has established a truly good and fine character. So here we have another hint in the dialogues of this Platonic principle that the good and one are the same, is one that is at one with itself. And a soul at one with itself will be able to discern goodness or evil or their absence, including because good reason demonstrates a kind of harmony, and harmony in turn is a kind of ratio, and ratio in turn manifests unity, manifests number, and the principle of number is the one. And a bit later, how of the unification or unification of the psyche through the unitive experiences that we share with the arts in our encounter with beauty, how this can work. He writes, we must seek such artists as have a talent to pursue the beautiful and the graceful in their work, in order that our young men will be benefited like those who live in a healthy place. So almost like an osmotic process. When something from these beautiful strike their eyes and ears like a breeze, brings health from salubrious and leave them unawares of childhood to love a resemblance to and harm the beauty of reason. Does the thinking torn between reason and passion? I don't see it. Anyway, he continues, are these not the reasons, Glaucon, I said, why nurture in the arts is most important? Because their rhythm and permeate the inner parts of the soul, bring graciousness to it, and make the strongest impression, making a man gracious if he has the right kind of upbringing. If he has not, the opposite is true. So this is the mania that doesn't come from the gods. But getting back to Wittgenstein, he says, the man who has been properly nurtured in this area will be keenly aware of things which are neglected, things not beautifully made by art and nature. He will rightly resent them. He will praise beautiful things, rejoice in them, receive them into his soul, be nurtured by them, and become good and beautiful in character and simple, as he said earlier. He will rightly object to ugly, so the discourse, that in which the one, you might say, seems to be obscured by a sort of meaningless multiplicity. He will rightly object to what is ugly and hated while still young before he has the reason. He who has been reared thus will welcome it and easily recognize it because of its kinship with himself, because he's with himself. So these unitive moments contain, in a sort of inarticulate way, the principle of everything, the ultimate object of human desire, the basis of truth. They aren't just addendum to the quirk of Platonism. It's heart. But going to mystics, she discusses Plato's interest in ecstasy, in oneness, but for her, it doesn't appear as the goal of philosophy. She sees it as really a kind of byproduct of the exercise of cleverness. So anyway, how could these two writers, and by extension, many of us in the modern West, be missing such an important point in Plato? In fact, that's the very core of his teaching. I think there's a powerful clue in what Socrates says, in my view, at one point in this passage of the Phaedrus we're looking at. We'll be talking about next. I hope you can join me then. Until then, be well, and thanks for watching.